Let's go ahead and get started. Hello, welcome. I'm Matt Cooper with Academic Analytics. It's a great pleasure to have you with us here today. Let me say a few notes about the webinar itself, and then I'll turn it over to our panelists. Everyone is muted on entry here, but we want to hear from you. The chat is open. Feel free to direct your questions to the whole panel, or you can send them to me. This is Matt Cooper, and I'll make sure they get aired. And with that, let me turn it over to Bob Berdahl, the Senior Advisor here at Academic Analytics, Chancellor Emeritus at the University of California, Berkeley, and President Emeritus of the AAU. Bob, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Matt. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. This is a special presentation for presidents that Academic Analytics has put together. We've had webinars for provosts and for deans and other senior administrators, but I believe this is the first one that we have a president presenting as specifically for presidents. And I think you'll find this to be quite informative. Every president, upon taking office, hopes to leave the institution stronger when they leave than it was when they came. In order to do that, you have to have a baseline. In order to do strategic planning, you need to know where you stand and where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are. You need to have data in order to assess those strengths. And in developing a strategic plan, you also need to engage the faculty so that the faculty understands where you're taking the institution, why you're emphasizing the kinds of programs that you are, and so forth. To build new programs, and interdisciplinarity is becoming ever increasing in its importance. In order to build new programs, and interdisciplinary ones in particular, you need to have an understanding of the collaborations that are going on your campus and with others off campus, and how you can include all of the faculty who should be included in an interdisciplinary program that you're launching. To recruit new faculty, it's helpful to know who's working on what issues, who can add strength to the programs that you're trying to build. Today, we're going to talk about some of those issues. We have a presentation by President Kirk Schulz of the Washington State University. Kirk was a chemical engineer. He spent 7 years as president of Kansas State University, and he's been president of Washington State University since 2016. We're very happy to welcome Kirk here today for a very interesting presentation. Kirk, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. I know how valuable presidents and chancellors' time is, so thanks for giving us an hour of your time. And if it's boring and not useful, you can at least be doing some email on the side. So what I want to talk a little bit about is I'll give a little bit of an overview of Washington State University, just a brief overview, and then talk about some of the challenges and things that we're doing to really build a data-informed culture and data-informed decision-making strategy, and how that really relates to institutional planning, strategic planning, and growing our research base. So with that, next slide, please. Well, we're going through a bit of a transformation at WSU. When I started in 2016, we had struggled for several decades, really, on are we a system? Are we a flagship campus with some branches? And there have been lots of white papers written about what we needed to do and look like. But after my first sort of 5-year appointment as president of WSU, the board and I really talked about it was probably time to take a step and formally recognize that we were a system of interconnected campuses within the state of Washington, as opposed to sort of a hub and spoke model where we were a flagship with branches out there. So this is a map of the state of Washington. You see at the bottom, we have 5 physical campuses that span the state. Our historic flagship campus is located in Pullman, right near the Idaho border in eastern Washington. Our health sciences campus, which is medicine, pharmacy, and nursing, is located in Spokane, second largest city in Washington, also on the eastern side of the state. In the sort of wine country and located essentially adjacent to Pacific Northwest National Lab is our Tri-Cities campus with a strong STEM focus. If I move to the coast, then in the Portland, Vancouver area, we have a campus there that has been in existence over 30 years that has a pretty broad approach. And then our newest physical campus is located north of Seattle in Everett, Washington, with a STEM focus co-located with a community college. And we offer the final 2 years of STEM related programs there. And then we have our second largest campus, actually, in terms of enrollment, is our global campus, which is how we brand our online programs, very similar to what many people do. So you add all that together. As a land-grant university, we also have an extension service throughout the state. And then we have 4 what we call research and extension centers in Washington, which are focal points around the agricultural industry with certain expertise in those areas that would be larger and broader than a normal extension site would be in those particular counties. Then we also have multiple teaching centers in the state. We have 2 or 3 of those where we offer a degree program or 2. And then we're newly establishing a teaching center in Nairobi, Kenya, as part of the work that we're doing in infectious disease research throughout Eastern Africa. The bottom line is you describe that. Most people would say you've described a system, but until about 2 years ago, we had not formally recognized ourselves as such and started structuring ourselves in that same particular way. So the reason that I bring all this up is that this put us in a really unique opportunity. As Bob mentioned at the beginning, when you step into a new opportunity like that, it doesn't always have to be at a different campus. You need some baseline information. You need to know where you are, where are your growth opportunities, and what types of things do we need to be doing as we look ahead. You can imagine that faculty and staff and some students, when we talk about doing the system thing, the first thing they look at is saying all you're doing is adding institutional overhead and additional, highly compensated leaders. What is that going to actually do for us and what we want to do in research and scholarship and the benefit to our students? And as you know, that's a longer term exercise, and that's where analytical tools are going to be really important. So next slide, please. One of the first things that we decided we needed to do was we had done strategic planning at both the system and campus levels, largely on a semi-voluntary basis, right? Somebody at the provost's office would sort of say, well, it's time for reaccreditation. Let's get a group together and do a plan. We do something, lots of hard work. Many campuses do it that way. Then you sort of generally kind of put it on the shelf afterwards. You refer to it because you need to for accreditation. But if you ask yourself, are we actually using it as a decision-making tool? Are the president's goals and objectives aligned around a strategic plan with quantitative measurables? Maybe not so much. So one of the experiences I had in my previous institution was we needed some full-time people that were just dealing campus-wide, system-wide with planning, analysis, and data. So what I did is we stood up a brand new office. My former chief of staff, Chris Hoyt, was our inaugural vice president of strategy planning analysis. We cut off pieces that were informally my office when I was dealing with both the system and the de facto chancellor of the Pullman campus. So we split that off. And then we also moved institutional research, molded that in, and we're still continuing to do some consolidation. So we put all of our planning things in one place. So that was step one. Once that was set up, then that group and Chris and her team went out and said, okay, now we need some analytical tools and things that allow us to establish baselines and form a basis for decision-making institutionally and with strategy. So we're working on building a culture that supports data-informed decision-making. All of you out there know that everybody is in favor of this until the data doesn't help them make the decision they wanted to make. So that culture of saying, we want to look at data, we want to make it available, we want to use that. We've stressed that we want to be in a data-informed decision-making. It's not that data is going to completely make a decision for us because this is what it says in the spreadsheet, so this is what we're going to do. But we want to use that in that particular way and make sure that faculty are skeptical, normally, And if people can see the data and see the information, and we present it in a way that is helpful and people can be skeptical and see it for themselves, I think that makes a lot of difference. We also had a lot of data ownership issues, and we're still working through these, where Group A has owned this data for a long time. Group B has owned this data for a long time. And we need to be able to share that back and forth, use a set of tools, and have people have confidence that we're going to be protecting that appropriately. But we can't have the data hoarding that sometimes has gone on institutionally, at least at our place. And again, this was not done with any nefarious intent. It's just historically that was the way it was done. And it's just going to take some time to continue to build a culture of saying we need to have an office and the ability to use tools to access that data and information. So there's the internal part of that. Then there's also the external part of how do we use some of these tools, including academic analytics, to assist us in our planning and execution of our system-wide plan. Next slide, please. One of the things I mentioned faculty several times that is absolutely critical to our success in this endeavor has been the engagement with the Faculty Senate and our faculty leadership. Interestingly, our faculty leadership was very much in favor of us using data and being more transparent in our decision making. You almost never find a faculty anywhere that I'm aware of that says you need to be less transparent. People want to understand how you're doing things. So we talked with the faculty, and if I say negotiated, that probably implies, sort of opposing sides, but we certainly talked about academic analytics, why we would use it, and what those boundaries were going to be in terms of what we wanted to be able to use this for. We were very interested in academic analytics, as I'll share in a minute, to help us with strategy, to help us see networks of faculty across the system and things like that. We're a little less worried about faculty member X. How do they compare to faculty member Y? And there are some people that get worried that that's how the administration will use these particular tools. We were just upfront. That's not our interest. We want more broader types of things. And I think the best way to sometimes get over those skepticism is to use the tools, be open about how we're using the tools and what they've enabled us to do. And then before you know it, everybody thinks it was their idea to begin with. So I think that has really worked well. And I appreciate Chris Hoyt. I appreciate our Faculty Senate leadership and others that have just kept communications open about what we're doing, why we're doing it. And I think that's been very helpful. So next slide. So we have two part of our case studies, or three here. By case study, that may be a little optimistic on the wording there. I want to just three stories of how academic analytics has really assisted us, or is in the case is currently assisting us in some of our planning efforts. So the first one, next slide, please. One of the things that our board talks to leadership about, our Board of Regents, we are the state of Washington. We have 6 public universities. University of Washington, which almost everybody is familiar with, AAU, one of the largest research universities in the world. We have Washington State University, we're the land grant. Then we have 4 regional institutions, Eastern Washington, Central Washington, Western Washington, and then Evergreen State College. Each of those institutions has its own board. We don't have a single board. As a matter of fact, Washington as a state is a little bit of a free-for-all. If you can find the money to do something, there is nobody that's going to stand in your way of doing that. So we don't have a coordinating board. All that says that our regents then are just for Washington State University. They are not worried about other institutions. It's what we can do well. They've said, Kirk, we're just not telling the story of our success sufficiently. And of course, you start saying, well, okay, that's a big, broad topic. What does that mean? And what we need to do is start using some tools to try and dive down and say, what are some things that we could and should be talking about, for example, with regard to faculty expertise and faculty excellence. All of us believe, and all of us have, exceptional faculty members at our institutions. And so one of the things that we wanted to do was look and see in one of our particular areas of strength at Washington State is really our agricultural research. And We're the top USDA grant institution in the country. We're very proud of that fact. All of you on here have multiple things that you can say that you're proud of your particular institution. But what we didn't know was, what's the size of our faculty compared to our research strength? And are we about average size? Are we small? Are we large? What's the overall faculty productivity as a unit? How does it compare nationally? And look, there's all kinds of polls and information out there that we wanted a clean data set and source. And so we were able to show, for example, that we're in the top, percentile in terms of research strength. You can see that there, but our faculty size is really small. Now, our faculty will tell you that they know it's small and needs to be bigger. But I think if I look at this, you say, boy, if we're going to pick an area of selective investment, this may be an area where the yield is really, really high because we have such an outstanding set of faculty colleagues. We could have done this and have done this for other units and colleges, but for our board, we were also able to say, look, we talk about we have really great faculty. There's some quantitative data that supports that our faculty productivity is exceptional compared to our peers. So this is one set and one way dealing with our board who wants to see what are your areas of excellence and how are you going to measure those and how you're going to do it quantitatively, and going and maybe referring to the Princeton Review or US News and World Report or those kind of things where it's kind of a mishmash of stuff put together doesn't always necessarily feel like a great assessment tool, where something like this with a really national database to pull from makes a big difference. Next slide, please. So one of the other things is how we go about leveraging some of our strengths for broader impact. So one of the things that we did in our system and putting our system together was each of those campuses is very important to that localized community. Vancouver, Washington cares a lot about what happens for the system. But if you really get down to it, and I talk to the business community in Vancouver, they go, I want to make sure our campus here is thriving, has a thriving research program, has excellent faculty. So each one of those particular campuses has a unique position in their community, a unique mission. So it turns out that in our Tri-Cities area, our campus that's located adjacent to Pacific Northwest National Lab has a strong interest and desire to focus around energy. They're near the Hanford site. There's a long history of research in nuclear science and engineering in that space, as well as a variety of traditional fossil fuel related research areas, as well as a lot of green energy type of work. So one of the opportunities that our chancellor there came up with a couple of years ago was how can we build out and be a campus that's focused around energy? So one of the things that she came up with was this concept of the Institute for Northwest Energy Futures. Idea was a bipartisan research center that would have faculty expertise that people in the region and the state could come and say, we need some assistance with energy policy. We need some technical expertise. It's not a Democratic or it's not a right or left leaning group. This is an area that higher education, I think, can play a major, major role. So the long and short, we were able to secure some funding for this. So that's the good news. The question now becomes, we're going to hire some tenure track faculty and graduate students, and we'll have some space. And all of you have done these kinds of things at your own institutions. The question then becomes, how do you build this out? And how do we make sure that we are bringing faculty from a broad range of campus locations and disparate research areas together to help make this be successful? So the next slide. So one of the things, and this is one of the super powerful tools for us for academic analytics, is this ability to do these networks and figure out what are some connections at WSU. We're 28,000 students across all those campuses. We've got faculty, tenure track faculty and research programs and PhD programs at virtually all of our campuses. So it's not all housed just in Pullman, it's all over. So the question becomes with something like this, you've got funding, you're going to move it together. If you talk to faculty members in engineering, they tend to know their faculty colleagues in engineering really well, but maybe not so sure about campuses elsewhere in the system or colleagues that may be in a very different area that they don't interact. And what this tools, the academic analytics tools allow us to do is build these networks that's shown here that show expertise areas that we may not be aware of because they're in very different disciplines, allows us to build teams in mapping out what our current research strengths look like and what our footprint is in the area. And this is just a plot that shows that. And later when I'm done, Matt can go back and actually talk specifically about what this shows. Next slide, please. So we also need to find out who are the emerging next generation faculty who can lead these efforts. I think for something like this, you certainly want your senior faculty involved, but you also need to make sure that you don't have all the senior faculty that sometimes will consume every research resource you bring in lieu of making sure we're also involving junior colleagues in assembling and bringing in new people. Data helps strengthen where our weaknesses are. It also helps us understand, hey, we've got great expertise in this across 3 locations and 5 departments that maybe those people know each other, but maybe they don't. And I tend to find that in my career, faculty remember back to some day when campuses were a little bit smaller and people kind of knew each other a little bit more. And if I go back to WSU, we've got some very senior faculty who've spent 50 years here that can remember when they knew every faculty member who had a research grant, and we've just grown like many places have over time. It's gotten more complex, and these tools are needed not just to get the money. And I want to really leave everybody with this, but to help us strategically figure out our expertise, our holes, our networks, and where we can really grow to make this really successful moving forward. Next slide, please. So with that, I just wanted to illustrate a couple concrete examples. We're a work in progress. I want to make that clear. This is not the kind of thing that we've done this over the last decade and we can point to all these things. But I think we're making substantial progress quickly. The academic analytics team and tools have been indispensable for us, and it's a trusted brand. And I will say this, faculty tend to be skeptical for some reason, I don't know why, of things when they sometimes come out of the president's or chancellor's offices. And I found this to be a tool that people go, hey, this isn't edited by Kirk or his team or anybody like that. And I think that ability to be able to pull what is deemed clean data up around things, I think is seen as really, really important and can help us focus on problem solving, not arguing about the data source. So with that, I appreciate the opportunity. Happy to respond to questions or comments or anything like that. And thank you to Bob and Matt for giving WSU an opportunity to talk about a work in progress and what we're doing here out west.
Well, thank you very much, Kirk. I think this is a really interesting presentation of how you have used data to inform your decision-making and develop your strategic plans. I'm sure there are questions that a number of people have. Let me ask one question. Our faculty at some of the more remote campuses, do they have a sense of being second-class citizens to the main campus and hence have more, and the main campus in Pullman, less inclined to collaborate with them? Does this help foster collaborations across your various campuses?
Yeah, so Bob, thanks for the question. And of course, it's not as simple an answer as a yes or no. We are unique in that WSU as a system has a single accreditation. We are not accredited by campus, and we have a single faculty. So if you're in electrical engineering at Vancouver, you're part of the School of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science. That's a system-wide school, maybe housed in Pullman, but faculty tenure is again handled on a sort of a system basis, if you will. It's not done necessarily by campus. So what that means then is faculty colleagues should be deemed the same regardless of campus location. However, the reality is it's easy to sometimes in Pullman, where you've got the bulk of your faculty, especially your really research active members of national academies, those folks are all kind of in one location. it's easy to walk down the hall and talk to a colleague. Sometimes you don't think, well, maybe I'll also pull somebody from Vancouver in. So it's going to help us with that a great deal. And this is part of our system evolution, is trying to ensure that our research, big research efforts are system-wide and not single campus-wide. Interestingly, and I'll stop after this so people don't go, God, if I ask a question, he's going to go on for 20 minutes. The medical school and that area is really growing up in that Spokane area. So the other interesting thing, internal dynamic, is that is a rapid growth area that's not on the flagship campus. So what we need to make sure is that our colleagues in Spokane are working closely, even though it's only 70 miles apart, with our flagship campus, even though there's rapid growth occurring there. So it's not just on the flagship area. It's also, we got to make sure that some of our other campuses who are leading it aren't also saying, well, now that I have the money, it's the golden rule. Whoever has the gold makes the rules, that now that I have the money, forget the flagship campus. We're going to do it on our own. We've got to remind everybody that this is system effort and these tools will help.
Thank
Kirk,
you.
Several questions coming in here in the chat.
Good.
The first has to do with that, the budget model in place to make a lot of these innovations work. The question is, how can these initiatives be most successful, particularly in operating environments that are more decentralized, maybe RCM environments or spread across campuses? Your thoughts there, Kirk?
Yeah, so we're actually moving to a modified RCM model at WSU. It's not a straight RCM, but we have, we're like a lot of places, we have the old, back in 1960, some people got in a room, decided how to budget, and it's been historical since that time, to try and do a reset on some parts of that. So I think we're doing this hand in hand with a budget model redo, and our budget model redo, we're on year 2 of a 3-year process. So we've had a lot of faculty involvement in this. This has not been administration doing this there. And actually, we think some of these tools are going to help us with how we decide to do future allocations. And we're trying to use our budget model change to set up some internal excellence funds that some of this type of data could be used to illustrate on areas where we need further investment. We try and do it in a collaborative way, but I will say the more data and information we have, it tends to help us with decision making versus somebody going, 15 years ago, we had X number of faculty in program Y. We now have, 2/3 of X, and we need to get back to where we used to be. The data and us using data has helped us to sort of say, well, let's look at majors, let's look at teaching load, let's look at research output, and maybe that's a more appropriate size for a unit now. So those are all going to be the kind of things that are part of our data, informed decision making, and being more transparent about that. And so I'm not sure I've answered that question directly, but it's I do think the stronger and weaker units part becomes more apparent sometimes when data is out there. And I will have stronger units say, well, let's just eliminate the weaker one. All of us see this in higher ed. And sometimes we have to remind folks that the weaker unit, which can be defined by faculty expertise or size or research output, maybe in a community where they are sorely needed in that community. And so we can't just simply say, well, let's put it all in one place. So like everybody on here, these decisions are never 1 and a 0. It's shades of gray, and you pick which you think is the right shade and move forward.
Question here. Let me go back to the collaborative map that you had across WSU for those with expertise in the area of the Institute for Northwest Energy Futures. A question here about how this kind of collaboration mapping and bringing folks together can also promote diversity and ensure that people are included who may not otherwise have been included. Your thoughts there?
Yeah, one of the things that happens is we all tend to default to our colleagues that we know. And as we diversify the faculty in terms of, race and gender and ethnicity and, all those types of things, sometimes some of our colleagues that are, new to academia get left out. And sometimes we just don't know that, or we don't spend the time to do it. Or I'm a chemical engineer, things that were in the social justice space, a lot of things around Black studies or Native American studies, or pick a whole variety of programs didn't practically exist when I went to school. So if you got my generation of folks building research teams, we may find out that that there are some things we need to worry about in the space. Let me give a very concrete example. So in Washington, one of the things that one of our Native American tribes is dealing with is they are working hard on putting in some green energy and green energy storage, including solar panels and things like this. Well, people drive by in the state, they see a big open area and they say, let's put a bunch of solar panels there. Well, it turns out that there's some plants that this particular tribe harvests and uses for medicinal purposes and have for generations, that now, because of putting some of these solar farms in, are no longer grown and they can't have access to them. You would say, from an engineering perspective, it's big open land there, gets lots of sunshine. Why not put solar farms up there? And it turns out if that group, this was not a WSU project, had involved people from our Native American studies area and worried about some of the cultural parts of doing an energy related project, that's an example of a collaboration that if you didn't make that, you wind up screwing something up, and then all of a sudden it can become controversial, where those are the types of connections that these maps will help us make to find out that somebody in that program had written about energy policy 10 years ago and nobody knew about it. We bring them into the fold. So I think it can directly make a difference on having a diverse and inclusive set of colleagues working to solve some of these complex problems.
I think that's a really wonderful example of how these big ticket issues like energy or global warming and the impact of global warming or how we deal with it really involve many, many disciplines, from the STEM disciplines to the social science disciplines and so forth. And having the ability to identify people working on the same issues in entirely different fields is a very useful kind of thing to have. And this tool will enable you to do that.
If I look over my career, and Bob, you've done this at some very large research universities, I hear people sometimes, especially very senior faculty, will say things like, when we had a faculty club, I used to know people in other disciplines, right. Or, we would socialize together, and, the faculty club type of, environments are not at as many universities as they used to be. And I find that people have become more compartmentalized and siloed just because we've gotten big, and some of that socialization doesn't occur as much anymore. We got to have tools and stuff to, not the socialization part is, another desirable thing, but otherwise people sometimes in engineering at WSU really have no idea who the new hires are in our ag field or in social sciences or things like that. We need ways of just figuring out, hey, we got new people on board that are doing this, or maybe a mid-career colleague who's taken a bend in their research direction and is working on something else. So I tend to think that sometimes people will wish back to some days when then everybody knew each other differently. The reality is we're large enough and complex enough that we've got to have some other way to do it than do you run into each other at a particular social function. So I lay that out there because I think this is the first time in the last decade I've seen some tools that really can help us do what I think we've struggled. We've all tried to, let's do a website where everybody puts on their research expertise. And if I want to develop a team, I go grab it and I look through it and do searches, and, it sort of works. I think this works a lot better.
Kirk, a question here about how you're building the right leadership team to sustain new initiatives like this. Your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think talent and bringing in talent is harder now than at any time in my career. I've been a president now for 14 years, and we are doing a lot of searches where we get, our final person that accepts a job is exceptional. We are super excited. And you say, how deep was the pool? And you're like, well, if we didn't get that person, we were in trouble. I think it's important for us to look for colleagues that share a common set of values about the use of data in decision making. I think it's important that during the interview process, we explore that and we try and make sure that we have that as part of our conversations, and not just as the president or chancellor talking to them about that. If they come and spend 2 days visiting with faculty leadership and deans and, doing a forum, and this comes up multiple times, I think it's helpful, and it shows that it's not a presidential initiative, but it's a campus embraced initiative. And I can guarantee if you interview for a senior position at WSU right now, you'll be asked about this type of, it may not be academic analytics, but you're going to ask about data, strategy, planning, how you all are deciding that. And actually, we recently landed a new candidate for a particular senior level position that was intrigued and wanted to come because we're building a system, we're using data, we're trying to figure out how we can be more effective and efficient with some of our operations while maximizing, opportunities for students and faculty and staff success. And, it's a big challenging problem. So I just think you got to be upfront about it. And not everybody's going to jump on board with the same level of enthusiasm, and that's okay too. But I would say if your CFO, your provost, depending on how you have health sciences structured, I would say those, sort of senior level officers need to, and the president has got to, our chancellor has got to be supportive. I think if you don't have those involved and engaged, and your deans, I think it would be really difficult to really make any movement here.
That prompts one question, Kurt. How deeply in the organization are people using academic analytics? Are the deans using it actively? Do department heads use it? Who are really the users that you're besides the central administration?
I think Chris Hoyt would have to answer that. She would know that more. I do believe many of our deans are utilizing this, but I know an awful lot of our vice presidents and chancellors are certainly utilizing the tool. But for us, as I mentioned in the beginning, this is a relatively new experience. Some people have been working with you all for quite some time. Yes. So I think our deans have been pressing us for several years to pony up the money internally and centrally and not take it from their budgets to bring on academic analytics as some tools. So yeah, we haven't really taken the step necessarily yet where a lot of the department heads are using it. I know a few have dabbled with it just because I had a conversation with them, but I think given another year, we're going to find a lot more usage at that particular point. So, and part of it too is at the end of the day, like if I'm going to hire a new physical chemist or somebody in engineering, if we can get away with $750,000 in startup money, you go, wow, what a bargain. And I think what is happening around the country, I had this conversation yesterday with our faculty regent, is that some places were hiring less tenure track folks and they're hiring more career track faculty. And if you ask why, sometimes it's not even the salary. I think it's people just don't know how they're going to come up with all these dollars. So the reason I bring all this up is I think we're going to start seeing, if I look at my crystal ball, and if I was really good at this, I'd probably have a different job. But I think we're going to start seeing just more desire to say, look, let's build a cluster around this particular expertise area, have some centralized equipment that's world-class and those kind of things. But maybe every faculty member doesn't have to, that we bring in, have to have this particular area. And I still find hiring committees are like, we want to get the best person possible. And I get that, but it'll be a completely new, different area that sometimes we don't have expertise in. And so how do you balance that out? These are the kind of tools that can allow us to sort of say, we got a lot of expertise in this area. We could build a world-class group. And we have to separate, can Kirk come in and teach thermodynamics, but build a research program in catalysis instead of saying, well, if we're going to teach thermo, let's hire a thermodynamicist who's going to do research in that area. I think this will help us maybe be more strategic in building back the tenure track faculty, if you will, but do it in a way that also allows us to make sure that we're not duplicating resources internally that we don't need to, because that's the way it was done 10 years ago.
I think that's a very thoughtful projection for the future. Matt, are there other questions that are coming in?
Yes, Kirk, a question about your process when new opportunities like this come up. Could you weigh in on how you assess their viability, how you bring in different stakeholders who need to be brought in? Your thoughts there?
Yeah, WSU, when I arrived, was a little bit of a free-for-all. And just a quick illustration, I was like day 3 of the job. They brought the capital list in front of me and said, well, here's, our list of capital projects to go to the legislature with. And, do you want to move any of them around? And I was like, well, this doesn't sound like much of a process. If Kirk likes number 20, does that become number 1? And so over the last several years, we've tried to put in place processes on how we would go about evaluating ideas, and particularly what we're going to take to the legislature, as well as what we're going to take out for philanthropic investment. And we have faculty engagement in that. We have scoring systems that we use. So it's not Kirk sits around with a couple of VPs and chooses things. We really try and work through a set of priorities and what we think makes sense and what's saleable. So that's a little bit of what we do. And I like to remind people, if it's a good idea, it's a good idea. Just because the legislature may not fund it doesn't mean that we shouldn't find other ways to do it. So what we want to do then is have a process, and no process is perfect, but that we actually have some evaluation. We try and be pretty open with it. We make sure we have faculty involvement with selections and move forward. Then there's also a little serendipity. The chancellor of our Tri-Cities campus went on a week-long trip to Europe with the governor and a delegation to do one of these sort of 30-member delegation things, sat next to each other at dinner. And he asked her kind of what was going on in the Tri-Cities and what she was doing. And she said, hey, this is something that we're working on building. He got excited by it and came back and said, I think I might like to figure out a way to help. And now it had to go through the legislature and all that stuff, but it started because we had a chancellor had run this through the process. It'd been an idea in place for a couple of years, so it had been developed. And then when a funding opportunity opened up, we were just happened to be in a great place to be able to receive that. So that's a long-winded answer to say that we have a clear process. We work on those kind of things. At the end of the day, it needs to be something that I can, on behalf of the university, talk to elected officials, talk to our major donors, talk to foundations about, and that's the way we've been trying to do it.
One last question, then Bob, let me hand it back to you. Kirk, could you weigh in on how you're engaging the business community in the state of new initiatives like this and ideating for new things?
Yeah, we're like everywhere. We try and talk with the business community about what their needs are, both research and scholarship, as well as, graduates moving forward. My sense is when I describe what we're doing in general with using data to make decisions and things like that in a much more upfront, open way with both our board and with our donors, frankly, I find that they applaud that this is a great direction to take. And this gives me a bit of an opportunity to say I'm pulling practices from the business community that I think can help us be more effective in higher education. And so I think it's been very positive. One other quick thought, we didn't get to this today, but I want to make sure I mention it just as we're wrapping this up. I mentioned that we have this differing balance between we call them career track faculty and tenure track faculty. But what we found is over the last decade, a lot of our career track faculty have research interests. They just may not have the same research portfolio as some of our tenure track faculty. So these tools allow us to also sometimes get information about how we can pull additional faculty colleagues that you say, hey, they may not be able to do a 50% effort, but guess what? They've got some expertise in this area that could be part of a team that we're trying to put together and assemble. And I think all of us are trying to figure out how do we take these other faculty colleagues that have a lot to contribute at our institution, and how do we engage them in some of these big projects that they also have a lot of interest in. So with that, hopefully I've answered all the questions. Always happy afterwards if anybody wants to reach out to me or talk a little bit about what we're doing more in depth. Happy to have myself or my team talk with your place. So anyway, thank you.
Well, thank you, Kirk. I began this by saying every president wants to leave their institution stronger when they depart the position than it was when they came. I think the tools that you're using and the way in which you're creating a data-informed culture, measuring strengths, identifying strengths, places for investment, return on investment, all of those things I think are going to contribute to you being able to say, whenever you leave, and I hope it's not very soon, I left Washington State University, a better university than it was when I came. Thank you very, very much for your presentation. This was, I think, very, very insightful and informative. And thank you all for attending. We've really enjoyed having you visit with us. And if you have questions, feel free to direct them to Matt, or I'm sure Kirk as well would be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you for everything, and good morning or afternoon.
Thank you all. Have a good day.